Okay, so after the really embarrassing meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, where U.S. soldiers on their knees rolled out the red carpet for Putin, a war criminal who is indicted by the International Criminal Court, Zelenskyy will be coming to the White House. So the question is, what can we expect? Well, as of the moment I'm recording this, there have been rumors that both a bunch of European leaders have decided to come to the White House with Zelenskyy, and there's a rumor that Donald Trump is saying no to them. I don't know which is true here. Probably by the time you see this, we'll know. But regardless, if in fact they are coming, there's one reason, because they know that Donald Trump sold out Zelenskyy and they're coming to strengthen Zelensky's position. If they're not allowed to come, there's one reason, because Donald Trump knows he sold out Zelenskyy and was weak, and he doesn't want these people coming and changing his mind. So one of the big questions is, what are the areas that are really going to be discussed that are important that we need to be watching for? And then I'll kind of end with what should we really do in this case if we want to stand with Ukraine and watch Russia fail, which, by the way, they are losing this. So there's really three critical issues here. One is territorial lines. The next question is whether or not there will be a ceasefire, and exactly what Europe is doing regardless of what the United States does. So in these negotiations with Putin, we don't know what has been agreed to and what hasn't, or what's been suggested to have been agreed to and what hasn't. So Donetsk and Luhansk are two areas that Ukraine and Russia have been fighting over since 2014. But in this full-scale invasion, which commenced in 2022, obviously there has been quite a bit of fighting on that front. The front is basically not moving because of a sheer amount of first-person view drones, which almost disallows for any movement on the front lines. But Russia has made very, very tiny gains at a huge human cost. And right now, where Ukraine is actually a natural barrier because of the geography to holding Russia out, which is why Russia is spending, again, 1,000 men's life a day to try to take any amount of territory. Well, what Vladimir Putin claims is if Ukraine just gives him the rest of that territory, and Luhansk as well, that they will just freeze the line where they exist elsewhere. Let's think about Zaporizhia and some other places. Let's think about that for a second. Russia is having to expend 1,000 men a day to take small bits of this area of Donetsk, and how he just wants it from Ukraine. And by the way, this is not a small territory. This is big. This is like thousands of square miles left that Ukraine would be expected to simply walk away from and allow the Russians to come into. So the question is, what's done with the territory lines? Like, in reality, what should be done is Ukraine continues to hold its claim on the territory that Russia has seized. If they're not going to take it back, it would be a de facto recognition of Russia's involvement, which means simply recognizing the fact that Russia is there, but not legally recognizing Russia's position in that territory. But ultimately, the big thing is this: it is up to Ukraine to decide what they are willing to negotiate and what they are not willing to negotiate with. The United States and, frankly, Russia don't have any right to determine what Ukraine does or doesn't give up in this fight. The next question: Donald Trump has demanded that for any negotiations to occur, there needs to be a ceasefire. This is not a bad demand, and claimed that if Vladimir Putin wouldn't do this, then Donald Trump would implement these heavy sanctions against him, or actually secondary sanctions against people that buy Russian oil. Russian oil is keeping the Russian economy afloat in this really difficult time for them. Well, Vladimir Putin's been clear he's not going to do a ceasefire. And so what did Donald Trump do? Did he immediately implement secondary sanctions? Of course not. Instead, he once again tacoed, determined that that deadline didn't matter, and now we're going to have a discussion again, and maybe we don't even need a ceasefire. So that's going to be another thing we're watching in this discussion, is what is the situation with the ceasefire. But I think just as importantly is, what is Europe's stance here? So Europe in the past has been very deferential to the United States position in terms of diplomacy or anything like that in Europe. Obviously, since the arrival of Donald Trump, Europe's been trying to find their sea legs and stand a little bit stronger on their own, but there still is a lot of deference to Donald Trump, a lot of kissing his butt, a lot of complimenting him. I mean, you saw the head of NATO call him Daddy Trump, which is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. So the question is Europe going to stand up and say, look, we don't agree with what you're saying, Donald Trump, if in fact what Donald Trump is proposing is pretty bad, and we are going to back Ukraine anyway. We're going to continue to back them. Now, if the United States allows them to continue to buy U.S. weapons, that's a good thing. Although I'll remind you that we are now basically the Home Depot selling stuff in a hurricane-ravaged area, as my friend Terry Virts once said. So we're just there to make money, is what it seems like now. And this is a different position for the United States. So that will be a question. Again, does these European leaders come with Zelensky to the White House? If they are not allowed to come, why? Why is Donald Trump keeping them away? But are they willing to stand firm behind Zelensky? Because Zelensky ultimately has to be the one to accept whatever this deal looks like. So the last question really is, what should we really do here? Again, recognizing that this war, it's kind of like two fighters now, two boxers in the 10th round, just kind of slugging each other and not really making any gains. It's like, what's the point? So it would make sense to have an end to this war. But it also wouldn't make sense for Russia, who's been constantly defeated on the battlefield, by the way, to be able to gain territory without fighting. So what should we do? So first off, there's $300 billion of seized Russian assets sitting in banks. And to this point, the interest on those $300 billion has been allowed to some extent to be used to support Ukraine. But we have talked about for years, and it needs to be done, the $300 billion needs to be seized and taken from Russia. And then that $300 billion, a ton of money, should be used to purchase arms for Ukraine to defend itself. We have been sitting here for years talking about the $300 billion, and for some reason, they're so opposed to doing it. There are a few people in a few European countries that are opposed to doing it because they're afraid of what that message would be. Well, that message is very clear. If you're attacking a country and you're committing genocide and you're kidnapping children and you're throwing bombs into civilian areas, yeah, we're going to seize your money. So don't do that or expect to lose your money. And then Russian oil needs sanctioned harder and harder. So basically, Russian oil is sanctioned now, but there are countries that are not abiding by the sanction. China, India, and Iran are some of the largest countries in this case. So there needs to be secondary sanctions on those countries violating sanctions by buying Russian oil to compel them to make the cost to buying Russian oil for them more expensive than to buy legal oil on the free market. That's how you then cut off Russia's energy purchasing, which is the thing that is funding this war. So let's keep in mind, to those that say Russia is winning or Russia is on the verge of winning, those are the same people that said that Russia would defeat Ukraine in 3 days. And what happened? Basically a month into the full-scale invasion, Russia went from occupying 35% of Ukraine to 20% as Ukraine fought back. And then it has been a slow grind on the Eastern Front, and Ukraine has killed, captured, or wounded over a million Russian soldiers. Russia is losing this war, and their economy is on the brink. Their economy is on the verge of, frankly, being flat or collapsing. There are runs on the Russian bank. Inflation is out of control in Russia. They've had to cut bonuses and pay to soldiers enlisting in the military because they simply cannot afford it. They're running out of air defense, so that's why all these Ukrainian drone attacks, and when we talk about drones in this case, not frontline drones, but these deep strike drones, they're the size of like small airplanes, Cessnas. They're not the little drones you think of. That's why these Ukrainian drone attacks are getting through and hitting all these different facilities in Russia, because Russia is out of air defense. So that's another thing to keep in mind, and why it's important right now, when you have Russia on the ground, when they're gasping for air, not to bring the ambulance oxygen mask over and put it on them and breathe new life into them. Now is the time to continue to suffocate that Russian economy and to stand with Ukraine. So this is going to be a very big meeting. If Donald Trump continues to sell out Zelensky, the hope here is that Europe stands strong and says, we don't need the United States then, and we will stand with Zelensky. The scariest option is if Europe is so desperate to get out of this war that they're willing to sell Ukraine down the river. Again, any peace deal has to have the agreement and buy-in of Ukraine. the country that's being invaded. So that's what we're going to be watching for. The reality is probably this is not going to get solved again anytime soon, but we'll have to wait and see. Either way, I think this meeting could be one of the biggest days, biggest meetings to deal with post-Europe since World War II that we have seen in a very long time. So Slava Ukraini, and they will continue to defend themselves against this terrible, evil Russian invasion.